Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to my complete Sigewinne guide. Sigewinne is the newest 5-star Hydro support and healer released in the second half of version 4.7, and today we're going to cover everything you need to know about Sigewinne. We're going to talk about her best builds, teams, weapons, artifacts, constellations, playstyle, and much more. I'm going to cover my thoughts on this character, her strengths and weaknesses, and also everything you need to know to make your Sigewinne as strong or as efficient as a healer as possible. Before we begin, I want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested, and also excuse the difference in mic quality as I wasn't at my usual setup when recording this video. With all that out of the way, let's talk about Sigewinne. Alright, so starting things off, let's talk about Sigewinne's talents and abilities and what you need to know about her overall. First of all, for Sigewinne's elemental skill, she will blow a bubble that will be shot and will bounce between nearby enemies, dealing hydro damage bonus based on Sigewinne's max HP. As it bounces, it will heal HP to all of your party members except Sigewinne, so team-wide AoE healing except for Sigewinne herself, and then her last bounce will also heal Sigewinne as well by a much larger amount. This means that all the bounces will heal all party members outside of Sigewinne, and then the last bounce will also heal her with one bigger chunk of burst healing. Overall, her skill gives you a solid amount of team-wide healing passively as your skill bounces. This ability is one that you can press or hold, and when you hold it, you can charge it up and the bubble will grow in size, up to 2 tiers in size, each of which increasing its damage and HP by 5%. With that in mind, 5% is not that much, and it does require some time to hold, so you can do this if you want to, but a lot of the times just pressing your skill will be more than enough for your healing. With that in mind, holding your skill does give your bubble up to 10% more healing and will also imprison certain weaker enemies. They'll get trapped inside a bubble, similar to the Hydro Abyss Mage that has been doing that to us for years. Outside of that, Sigewinne's elemental skill will generate 2 source water droplets, which when she picks them up, will give her a bond of life equal to 10% of her max HP. This will give her a bit of elemental energy, up to 5, and will also give her up to 30% healing bonus through her A4 passive, which is nice and makes it worth picking these up if you need more healing for your Sigewinne. Outside of that, you can also use these source water droplets with other characters like Nevelet, being able to suck them up for his powerful charge attack, but this is typically more or less relevant and not really the main part of her skill. Additionally, Sigewinne's elemental skill comes with a hit of Usia aligned damage if that's something you care about for specific enemies. Sigewinne's elemental skill has an 18-second cooldown and a solid HP scaling for your healing, notably on the final bounce. For Sigewinne's elemental burst, this is a syringe she'll whip out, dealing some AoE hydro damage based on her max HP for a total of 2.5 seconds. This is an ability with an 18-second cooldown and a 70 energy cost, meaning not the best uptime and also potentially making her need quite a bit of energy recharge if she wants to use her burst on cooldown. This burst does not provide you with healing and is not needed for her main kit, is not needed to heal your team and be a support, but can be used if you want some AoE hydro damage. With that in mind, be wary as this ability requires a lot of field time and also only applies hydro twice, so does not give you good hydro application at all, but does get better with constellations. At a baseline, it's something that you can use for some AoE, but is not something that you need to use because it does require a lot of field time that doesn't contribute to your healing and won't necessarily be as good DPS as if you just go to another character who you have built. Moving on, for Sigewinne's passive talents, her first passive is, in my opinion, the most interesting part of her kit. After using Sigewinne's skill, she will gain 8% hydro damage bonus and 10 stacks of Constellations. What Constellations will do is give you a elemental skill damage buff similar to Shenhe's Icy Quills, where you will give additional elemental skill damage to your off-field party members' elemental skill damage. This will be additional flat damage you are giving, again similar to buffs like Shenhe's Icy Quills or Shanyun or Yunjin's buffs, giving you an additional 2800 damage increase to your elemental skill damage that you're getting from another off-field party member. You will reach this 2800 cap at 65,000 HP, and this buff will last for 10 hits. Keep in mind that each hit that is done does count as a stack, so this can deplete faster than you might think. This passive also only works on off-field skill damage, meaning it doesn't synergize as well with a character who does a lot of skill damage from on-field, thinking of someone like Navia, but will instead synergize very well with off-field skill damage dealing supports, thinking of someone like Farina or Fischl, who deals solid damage from off-field, or other characters that we'll cover in the team section. For Sigewinne's other passives, while her A4 we already covered, its healing bonus for Bond of Life, and her last one is an exploration passive that will give you healing while you swim, which I typically wouldn't mention, but I do think it contributes to Sigewinne being a comfy overworld character, which I think is kind of what they're going for with her design. Before moving on and talking about her playstyle and my thoughts on her, I want to say that for her talent priority, just level your skill to increase your healing, and then if you plan on using your burst and want to increase its damage, then you can level your skill as well. And regarding your normal attacks, you can purely ignore these. And while I didn't mention her charge attack at all, it is a Hydro one, but it scales on attack and is not one that I recommend using basically ever. Now moving on, let's talk about Sigewinne's playstyle and get into a healing showcase to give you guys an idea of what to expect. Well, first of all, I believe Sigewinne is a a very straightforward healer to use. You can press or hold your skill and then just swap out. When you use your skill, there will be source water droplets that you can pick up to get a bit more healing bonus, and your skill will go around healing all of your party members outside of Sigewinne as it bounces, and then healing Sigewinne herself with the last bounce. You can press your skill and swap out to spend really little field time on her and get out as fast as possible, or hold your skill to heal for a bit more than the normal ones. This can be nice to get more procs of either Clam or Song of Days Past, a bit more healing, and therefore a bit more damage, with both pressing your skill and holding your skill being viable, just trying to spend as little field time as possible on Sigewinne. Her skill will bounce around, bouncing between enemies and applying a bit of hydro, while also buffing your skill damage, and that's basically all you need to know. Regarding her elemental burst, while this is an ability that gets significantly better with her later constellations, at a baseline, the scaling is not that high, making its damage not be that high. However, its field time is. The animation is pretty long, and then its duration is 2.5 seconds, meaning that if you want to get this AoE hydro damage, you have to spend a lot more time on your Sigewinne than if you were to just skill and swap out. On top of that, you need to build a lot of energy recharge in most teams, and so because of this, using her burst is not necessary at all. It doesn't give you any healing, doesn't give you buffs, and only applies hydro 2 times, making its hydro application honestly pretty bad, and its damage isn't like insane either. And so if you have nothing better to do or like its animation, you can use it. But at C0, I don't believe her standard playstyle will be using her burst, or at least emphasizing it, typically just using her for her skill and then swapping out to a character that will deal more damage and where your time is better spent than going through her entire burst animation, unless it's something you're building around. Using her skill, healing your team, and swapping out is, in my opinion, the way to use Sigewinne as an efficient healer, but obviously we'll cover everything in this video in case you want to build her for burst damage for some reason. Alright, now with that said, to get into a quick healing showcase of how much Sigewinne heals, here's what you need to know. Now, obviously, this will vary based on how much HP you have and stuff, but this is going to be on my Sigewinne on a standard Ocean Hued Clan build with really not that much HP, under 57k without her signature weapon. I'm using the 3-star recurve bow, and my healing is honestly pretty good. Healing over 4,700 to all of my party members just through my press skill. Picking up the source water droplets for a bit of healing bonus though is definitely really nice for party-wide healing the 3 party members outside of Sigewinne, being especially nice to stack up Farina's fanfare. With that in mind, the healing number is even higher if I hold my skill, and lower if I don't pick up the source water droplets. Regarding the last hit, this one is nearly 30k at my HP amount, although it only heals Sigewinne, but still a very big number, and even the overflow healing will count towards things like the Ocean Hued Clam set, which is very relevant for Sigewinne. Because of this, I believe that while her kit does have flaws that I'll cover in the next section, her healing is definitely her strong suit, being a pretty high amount that you get even just by pressing your skill and swapping out, healing all of your other party members continuously, and your Sigewinne at the end. Now, with all that said, I want to talk about Sigewinne's pros and cons and my honest thoughts on her. Well, first of all, let's start with her strengths. She is a character who does have solid team-wide healing, even when compared to other healers. She also offers you a skill damage buff for your off-field characters, and can run supportive artifact sets like Song of Days Past or Ocean Hued Clam that synergize well with her healing. Also, her entire kit, both healing, skill damage, and also the fact that she's hydro for the resonance, all synergize pretty well with Farina, which is what I think her kit is sort of designed for. She also does have a great 3-star weapon option, a few different sets to choose from, and also solid constellations that make her feel like a more full and complete character, like notably her C2 that shreds the hydro resistance of enemies, or her later constellations that let her burst actually deal good damage. But outside of that, her pros kind of end there. While I tried to keep this video as a mostly objective review of her kit and just keep it focused as a guide, I do also want to give you guys my honest thoughts on her kit, and this is where we have to talk about her cons. First of all, her hydro application is not great. While her skill can bounce between enemies and therefore apply hydro on multiple different enemies, it only bounces 5 to 7 times, and afterwards it just goes on cooldown, and its cooldown is pretty long. On top of that, her elemental burst is generally not worth using unless for some reason you're going for a burst build or have constellations. While it's an ability that has a good AoE, it just requires too much field time. The animation is long and the damage is really not that high. Like, here's the damage on just a full HP build, and then here's the damage on a burst support build running HP Sands, hydro damage bonus goblet, and a crit circlet. And even then, even without factoring in how much energy recharge I may need, the damage is okay, like it's usable, but it's not better than swapping to my other characters or using a hyper carry on field, swapping through my supports, or even using an on-field hydro applier like Kokomi, who gives you way more hydro application that can help enable other teams. While Sigewinne can have enough hydro for something like a freeze team or as a small bonus on top of another Hydro character in something like a Taser team or alongside Farina, maybe in a mono Hydro team where I think Sigewinne does have a use case, as we'll cover later in the team section. And because she's a generic Hydro healer and Hydro is such a good element, she'll naturally be viable in many teams. Personally, I believe that this makes it to where you can use Sigewinne if you want to. She can be a team-wide healer who gives you a bit of skill damage and synergizes well with Farina, and that's usually it, unless you plan on pulling for Constellations. Because of how many good team-wide healers are already in the game though, she's not a character that I recommend pulling for if you're uncertain, but definitely has some use cases if you like her and want a comfy healer, which is what I will be covering in this video. I just wanted to at least give my honest thoughts on her somewhere in the video before we get into how to actually maximize this character and make her as strong as possible. Alright, now moving on, let's talk about how to actually build your Sigewinne. Starting things off for your artifact sets is pretty straightforward. As a healer with a lot of healing, a great standard generalistic set that I recommend for Sigewinne is going to be the Ocean Hued Clam set. This one will give you some healing bonus on the 2-piece, and then a bubble that will explode and deal physical damage in a decent AoE based on how much you're healing. As we saw earlier, Sigewinne's healing is pretty decent, and so while you may not necessarily cap every single Ocean Hued Clam bubble, you will typically heal enough to where you're getting a solid amount of bonus damage, as you can see here from the physical numbers you're seeing alongside my team's DPS. Make it a good set for some bonus damage that will scale with your healing. Now, as far as buffing your team goes, the Song of Days Past is also a great choice, once again giving you healing bonus on the 2-piece and then increasing your active party members' damage for 5 hits once you've healed enough. There's a bit of a delay before the set starts to take effect, but overall it's a solid buffing set that is good for characters who heal a lot like Sigewinne. Make it a great choice if you want to buff a hyper carry on your team. If you're playing someone who has a lot of personal damage, make it a contender for your best in slot option overall, both it and Ocean Hued Clam, depending on what you want and your substats. Additionally, since your elemental skill lasts for a little bit, even off field, and does have multiple hits, the Tenacity of the Millith set can be a solid choice as well if your party members need attack percent. While some characters you run Sigewinne with, like Farina, don't scale on attack, so this set would be less useful. If you are running powerful attack scaling characters in your team, then giving your team a 20% attack bonus is quite nice as a solid buffing 4-piece that you can use. The 2-piece will also give you 20% HP, which is a nice bonus as well. Generally speaking, these are the 3 sets that I recommend the most for Sigewinne: Ocean Hued Clam as a standard choice, or Song of Days Past or Tenacity of the Millith in order to buff your team more efficiently. With that in mind, there are more viable alternatives. First of all, you can run 2-piece of HP percent sets. You can run Instructor in a reaction-based team, although the 4-star set will make you have a lot less HP, so less skill damage bonus and less healing. Or 4-piece Noblesse Oblige if your team scales on attack and you have enough ER to spam your burst on cooldown, but as we saw earlier, you don't need to use your burst on Sigewinne every rotation, so this set is less recommended. Lastly, if you want your Sigewinne to do burst damage, you can run the Emblem set, which can be fun, but this playstyle is not recommended, especially if you don't have her Constellations. Also, Maiden's Beloved gives you more healing if that's something you need, but I don't recommend this set as much as the other supportive sets we talked about, as I'd rather deal more damage or buff my team instead of getting a bit more healing, but it can be viable if you need it. Generally though, I recommend keeping things simple and going for either Clam, Song of Days Past, or Millith, depending on what you need and your substats, with Ocean Hued Clam being the general choice for any team. Alright, now moving on for the stats you want on Sigewinne, just build HP percent. It may sound like I'm joking, but that's almost all you need on Sigewinne. Because her healing and her buff scales on HP, wanting up to 65,000 to cap out her skill damage bonus passive, and also getting more healing bonus through her other passive based on her max HP, this is the stat you're looking for literally every part of your kit. Because of this, look for HP percent everywhere you can get it on your substats for your Flower and Feather, and then look for it as a main stat on your Sands, Goblet, and Circlet. For other things you can do, a healing bonus Circlet can be viable, especially if you have HP percent substats, but as I mentioned earlier, Sigewinne is a character who heals enough. She has genuinely good healing, and so while you can get more healing bonus if you want, HP percent will typically just be better because it can help you max out your buff, hit that 65k threshold, while also already being a character that has enough healing. Lastly, regarding energy recharge, while I don't recommend it for a standard healer Sigewinne build because its damage is not that great and it only applies Hydro twice, you can build ER if you need it for either the Noblesse Oblige set, or if you want to just use her burst because either it looks cool or you want to build Sigewinne more as a carry. If you want to do a burst damage dealing build, you can look for stats like ER, Hydro damage bonus, and crit on top of HP percent, which can be viable with Constellations, but for the most part, keep things simple, stack HP percent, and don't worry too much about the other stats. Additionally, if you're running the Favonius Warbow, which we'll talk about in the next section, you can build some crit rate either on substats or on your Circlet if you want to proc its effect reliably. Additionally, I wanted to mention that while 65k HP is required to max out Sigewinne's passive, giving you bonus skill damage, it is okay if you can't get 65k HP, and aiming for around 50 to 60k is perfectly fine. Keep in mind that you get bonus HP through sources like the Hydro Resonance, and you can even run a weapon that gives you HP, like even the recurve bow, which we'll talk about in the very next section. And so just try to get as much HP as you can, and even if you can't get 65k, like personally I don't have that much HP, it is still perfectly fine. With that said, leveling your Sigewinne all the way up to 90 to get as much HP as possible is definitely going to be recommended. Alright, now moving on, let's talk about Sigewinne's best weapons. This is a section that is going to be very straightforward and where there are some amazing free-to-play options you can use, making her overall a very easy character to build for any player. First of all, let's talk about her signature weapon. This is a bow that gives you a ton of HP and is honestly a pretty niche weapon to pull for. While some other HP scaling bow characters like Yelan can use it, generally it's a weapon that is just catered towards Sigewinne, which can make it more niche and not something I necessarily recommend pulling for. With that in mind, it is Sigewinne's best in slot because it gives you 66% HP on its stat line and then up to another 40% on its effect. This is a lot of HP percent, and it will also give you elemental burst crit rate as a bonus, which is more or less relevant depending on if you are using or not using Sigewinne's burst. Now, while this is the bow that gives you the most HP, I personally don't think it's needed at all to pull for because you can usually get enough HP to heal and either cap out your passive or at least get a solid amount. As we saw, you don't need to have 65,000 HP for Sigewinne to be useful without even needing to pull for a signature weapon through even a free-to-play 3-star bow, the recurve bow, that already gives you around 46% HP. Additionally, before we talk about this weapon, your signature weapon's elemental burst crit rate is something that can be good if you are bursting, notably with Constellations, but at a baseline, unless you have Sigewinne like C6, you really don't need to use her burst at all, and she heals more than enough even without this weapon, so it's not a 5-star that I necessarily recommend going for, although it still is her best in slot overall. With that in mind, the recurve bow that I already mentioned is a solid stat stick that I can recommend as a free-to-play choice for anyone. You don't even need to refine this weapon as its effect is kind of just a bonus, being mostly just a stat stick giving you 46.9% HP at level 90. It's easy to level, easy to get, and a solid choice for Sigewinne that I can confidently recommend. With that in mind, if your team is energy hungry and you need more and have enough crit rate on your Sigewinne, you can run a Favonius Warbow to give your party some energy, which is a solid choice as a supportive weapon that I can recommend alongside recurve bow, depending on if you need more HP or more energy for your team. Additionally, regarding sacrificial bow, I do not recommend this for Sigewinne unless you just want to generate more water droplets for your Neuvillette, but typically it's not the best choice for Sigewinne. Additionally, other weapons like Elegy for the End can be a good choice if you are triggering reactions giving your team attack percent and EM, or Aqua Simulacra if you want HP and crit damage and are trying to use Sigewinne for damage, but this will typically only be recommended if you're trying to deal a lot of damage with her burst. Generally speaking though, the recurve bow is such a solid 3-star stat stick because it just gives you HP percent for free that it makes it to where everyone has a solid weapon option and will not need to pull for any other. With that in mind, you can also run the Favonius Warbow for energy or her signature weapon for the most amount of HP and her best in slot overall, or any of the others that I mentioned, like notably Elegy if you can trigger its passive. Next up, for Sigewinne's Constellations, here's what you need to know. For her C1, it will make the bubble from her skill bounce longer and will also increase her skill damage buff from her passive talent. Now, if you have 65,000 HP, this will give 3,500 instead of 2,800, which is a pretty decent increase to skill damage. Moving on though, her craziest constellation is her C2, which in my opinion makes her a much stronger support. Now keep in mind, Sigewinne gives you a lot of healing at C0 and is a fine character, but her C2 is genuinely pretty insane and gives her a much stronger role alongside other Hydro characters. First of all, while you're using Sigewinne's skill and burst, she will gain a Hydro shield scaling on her max HP. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this isn't just a generic shield that will make Sigewinne a shielder, it will just be one for Sigewinne while she is using her skill and burst, effectively giving her resistance interruption and preventing her from taking damage when using her abilities. The more interesting part of the second constellation, however, is its second effect that will decrease the Hydro resistance of enemies hit by Sigewinne's abilities by 35% for 8 seconds. This Hydro Res Shred is genuinely a pretty big deal when paired with another Hydro character, a Hydro DPS, or even Hydro support, as this will sort of act as a mini Verdescent Venerer set, decreasing the Hydro resistance of opponents and potentially skyrocketing your team's Hydro damage, especially if you are running multiple Hydro characters alongside each other. Moving on, C3 and 5 increase Sigewinne's talent levels, which is kind of whatever, and her C4 will increase the duration of her burst by 3 seconds. This will make it go from a 2.5 second beam to a 5.5 second one, which notably synergizes well with her 6th constellation that will make her burst a much stronger beam of damage, gaining a ton of crit rate and crit damage based on her max HP. If you have her C6, you can use her on field, giving her a sort of Neuvillette beam, and it does a solid amount of damage, unlocking a new playstyle for your Sigewinne. Overall, Sigewinne is a character who gains additional use cases with some constellations, but you shouldn't feel forced to get them as she is a fine fine healer at C0, although she definitely has a really solid C2 if you want to make your Sigewinne someone who synergizes better with Hydro characters and also gives a shield. Alright, now moving on, let's talk about Sigewinne's best teams and synergies. Well, as we saw throughout the video, Sigewinne is a Hydro healer who buffs skill damage, meaning that her strongest synergy is with Furina, who can use a team-wide healer. While Furina teams can use many different healer options, Sigewinne does offer you the synergy of giving you Hydro Resonance, increasing your max HP, on top of having a relatively high amount of team-wide healing and buffing Furina's skill damage, which can help you justify choosing Sigewinne as your healer. And so because of this, a lot of Sigewinne's teams will be paired with Furina. With that in mind, while Furina's her best synergy, other characters who deal good skill damage from off-field, thinking of someone like Fischl, or even to a certain extent characters like Yaimiko, Albedo, Chiori, just characters who deal damage, again, based on their skill when they are off-field. If you need a healer, then Sigewinne's passive can have good synergy with their kits and their main source of damage. With that in mind, for the teams you're looking for, Sigewinne can fit in most Hydro archetypes. Now keep in mind her Hydro application is not that great, but she can be added alongside another Hydro character for a little bit of bonus Hydro, again, notably with someone like Furina, or in teams where you don't need the most Hydro application, thinking of something like a Freeze team. Personally, I've enjoyed Sigewinne in a mono Hydro team. This is a team you can play where you pair Sigewinne with two other Hydro characters and then a flexible last slot. Your flexible last slot is typically an Anemo character to give you huge amounts of buffs through someone like Kazuha's passives, the Verdescent Venerer set, and also being able to group enemies. You could also use other Nemo options or even someone like Zhongli to give you a shield and some resistance shred. For the most part though, Kazuha is definitely going to be the best option, and for your Hydro choices, as I said, Furina synergizes really well with Sigewinne, again, because your skill damage actually buffs something, and if you're running Hydro characters here who don't do skill damage, for example, if you replace Furina with Xingqiu, then while Sigewinne can still work here, there really isn't much of a reason to choose her over other characters because she'll have less synergy in the team, although it'll still be viable. Overall though, I did enjoy a quick swappy mono Hydro team with Furina and Yelan or Xingqiu, but you could also put Ayato if you want someone to have more of an on-field presence and spend time on field DPSing. Outside of mono Hydro, you can also play Sigewinne in a freeze team, either a double Hydro freeze with Furina and Sigewinne, or just a standard freeze team where she acts as a healer who gives you a little bit of Hydro application through her bubble that will be bouncing. As I said, it's not the fastest Hydro app, but it is enough to keep enemies frozen, generally speaking, and you can always hold your E if you need more bounces. In a team like this though, where her skill damage bonus doesn't do too much, it's hard to argue choosing her over a Thrilling Tales Hydro like Kokomi, but her Hydro application is enough, and on the contrary, if you are using her in a double Hydro team with Furina, then her healing and skill damage bonus is quite nice, so freeze definitely works. Alternatively, you can play an Electro Charge Taser team where you are pairing Electro and Hydro characters together. These teams are really flexible, running your best Electro and Hydro characters together, characters you can quick swap between, and usually one who you can spend time on field with doing normal attacks. This can be an Electro applier, an Electro normal attacker, or even a Hydro one that you can spend time on field with and constantly proc Electro Charge. In this team, Sigewinne's buff can be relevant to multiple different characters you may be running, like Fischl, Furina, or Yaimiko. Keep in mind though that the team slots are very flexible, provided you are using the correct elements for basically any team that I'm showing you. With that in mind, Sigewinne can also be played in Dendro teams. You can play her in Nilou Bloom as a healer who can help give you some team-wide healing, although obviously since her Hydro application isn't the fastest, you would want someone else in your team to apply fast Hydro. On a similar note, you can play her in other Dendro teams like Hyper Bloom, again though, typically being paired with another Hydro applier to actually manage to trigger Hyper Bloom, and then you can run an Electro character who can trigger Hyper Bloom very fast, like an EM Raiden from off-field, or an on-fielder like Yaimiko or Sino. Keep in mind that since Sigewinne's Hydro application is very slow, you could technically do something like an Aggravate or Spread team with an Electro or Dendro carry if it's something that you want to do, although typically there will be better healer options than Sigewinne in those teams. For some other Hydro reactions, you can play Sigewinne with Vaporize, but you will need a fast Hydro applier alongside of her to make sure that your Pyro carry can vape efficiently, as obviously just Sigewinne on her own will not be enough. This team would be comprised of a Pyro carry, a Hydro support, Sigewinne, and a flexible last slot. Additionally, you can also run Sigewinne and Furina as a double Hydro sort of duo with a few different pairs of units, notably a double Geo team with Navia, or anywhere where you can fit them and need some Hydro. For the most part though, Sigewinne is just a pretty straightforward healer who I think's main synergy is with Furina and potentially some future off-field skill damage dealing units that we may get. There are many different teams where you can use her, as Hydro is such a prevalent element, although be mindful that you have enough Hydro application on your team for whatever reaction you're trying to go for, with my personal favorite so far being mono Hydro teams, although full disclosure, these are typically carried by characters like Furina and Kazuha and whatever other strong Hydros you have, not just Sigewinne, but she can be a solid healer in a team like this, using her skill and then swapping out, whereas if you'd want a more on-field Hydro applier, then you could use someone like Kokomi. And so yeah, overall, my feelings on Sigewinne are a bit mixed. She's a comfy healer who synergizes well with basically just Farina, but maybe a future unit who does off-field skill damage and wants a healer like Sigewinne. But for the most part, she's a character that you can use. She's comfy for overworld, gives you a decent amount of healing, honestly a pretty good amount of healing if I'm being honest, has her strengths but also has her weaknesses, and isn't someone that right now I recommend pulling for meta-wise, but if you like her, then you can definitely make use of her with the build and teams that I showed in this video. Thanks so much for watching. I'm very much looking forward to Natlan and the new characters coming along with it, so stay tuned for a ton of new guides and reviews coming out shortly. As always, if there's anything I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.